Donald Trump just threatened a 25% tariff.
Trump threatening a 25% increase on Canadian goods coming into his country.
25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada.
We're thinking in terms of 25% on Mexico and Canada.
25% tariff on Canadian imports.
We will tariff and tax foreign countries.
November 10th, 2024. I made this video where I talked about the impact of Trump and the tariffs on Canadian jobs. This video got one of the least amount of views, and some people even laughed me off saying that this would never happen. Here we are today, almost end of January, and we are all talking about it. And if these tariffs come into play, we will see an economic crisis in Canada like never before. We will talk about that and more in today's video, so let's get started. If you are new to this channel, my name is Avjot and I'm on a mission to retire 1 million immigrants with $5 million. And if you want to join this mission of mine, all you need to do is hit that subscribe button and do like the video so that more people like you can benefit from it. Canada and US are really big trading partners. $3.6 billion of goods that exchange between the two countries every single day. That's close to $800 billion per year. Of those $800 billion, Canada buys $372 billion of US exports. That's 17% of all US exports. So in other words, if US exports $100 of goods outside of the US, $17 is bought by Canada. On the other hand, US buys $436 billion of Canada exports, which makes 75% of Canadian exports. That basically means that if Canada is exporting $100 of goods outside of Canada, $75 is going to the US. That's massive reliance on one country. And the reason why Trump wants to put tariffs on Canada is because he's not happy with the deficit. He's not happy that US is buying more from Canada than Canada is from US. But first, let's understand the basics of tariffs. What are they? Let's talk about the bread example that I did in my last video as well. In 2023, United States imported approximately $5 billion worth of bread, pastries, cakes, and all baked goods from Canada. The problem is that Canada's baked good industry is just shy of 9 billion. That basically means almost 56% of the industry, the entire baked good industry, is dependent on US exports. On the other hand, US is not that reliant on Canadian bread because US baked good industry is 75 billion. And yes, while 5 billion is a big number for Canada, it only accounts for 6% of their industry. Now, Trump on many occasions has been seen talking about tariffs and how that would make US rich again, but that's not exactly how tariffs work. I'm not saying he's wrong, but that's not how it works. Let's see how it works. Let's take an example of, again, bread, and obviously bread is not the only thing that is impacted by tariffs. That's probably one of the least things, but I don't know, I'm in the mood of talking about bread. But let's say Donald Trump puts 25% tariffs on all bread coming from Canada. What would happen is, it's not like Canada has to pay 25% more. The US importer, whoever is taking the bread from Canada, they'll have to pay 25% more for the Canadian bread. What that does is, in the short run, US importers passes on this cost to the US consumer because they are not gonna, they don't have enough margins to absorb 25%. Canada is not gonna pay that 25%. So the US importer will just pass on this to the consumer, and because that would make it less competitive in the long run, they would look at US alternatives to replace the Canadian imported bread. Now, of course, if the tariffs come on February 1st, the importers will not be able to find substitutes in that small interval. Now, bread is just one part of the story. There's oil, there's lumber, there's so many natural resources that it's very difficult to find replacement for. Bread is just not even scraping the surface. Let's assume that this actually happens and they're able to find a replacement. How that would impact Canada is even worse. Canadian bread exporters would be like, oops, we got too much bread now, because now, 56% of everything that was exported, that still remains in Canada. Now, bread, of course, becomes cheaper for Canadians because they have to get rid of the bread, but the revenue of these Canadian manufacturers will be falling. Canadian bread, like I said, will become cheaper for Canadian consumers because bread has a shelf life and they have to get rid of the bread, but it's only in the short run it will become cheaper. But in the medium run and even in the short run, Canadian bread manufacturers have to shut down plants due to reducing export demand. And remember, 56% of everything is exported to US. And because these bread manufacturers will shut down their plants, there'll be mass unemployment that would happen in the bread industry. That's how tariffs work. If you look at this example, Canada's bread industry would be killed because more than half of it will be wiped out unless they are able to find another partner who can consume all that bread that US is leaving or imposing taxes on. On the other hand, US consumers will also pay the price of that expensive bread, but only in the short run, US will survive this. But Canada's bread industry would be devastated. Like I said before, USA account for 75% of all Canada's exports. That basically means that 25% of the Canadian GDP is reliant on these exports to US. And many reports are pointing that if we had the full extent of tariffs on everything that's been exported, now that's not how it works usually, but if that is to be taken as the truth, there will be a compression of 3 to 4% in GDP. We'll have negative GDP 3 to 4%, and that's not healthy for any economy. Now let's talk about different industries and how they'll be impacted. Canada exports over 3 million barrels of oil per day to US, and losing this market would result in oversupply, driving down prices in Canada. However, Alberta's economy could crash in the short run. Because Alberta economy, even if we talk about different industries that have entered Alberta, it is still very reliant in terms of employment on the oil sector. And unless we are able to find another partner who can buy all that oil off of us, it will be extremely difficult to recover from there. Because in order to transport crude oil to different countries in Europe and Asia, you need pipelines, you need infrastructure that Canada does not have right now. Let's talk about the auto sector. Canada's auto sector contributes 10% of the Canada's manufacturing, employing 500,000 Canadians. And if there are tariffs that are put on auto parts, because a large majority of this manufacturing is happening for auto parts, and then US and Canada has free trade between movement of auto parts and cars between the two countries, there is a very high chance that a lot of people will lose their jobs within a year. Talking about lumber, softwood lumber is a key export to the US. It is used in making homes in the US. They have a very high target of building 1.5 million homes every single year, and a trade wall will decimate the forest sector, especially in British Columbia and Quebec, and we could lose almost 25,000 jobs if the tariffs are put on lumber. If we talk about farmers and agriculture, Canadian farmers rely heavily on US markets for wheat, beef, pork, and other products that they export to the US. And tariffs on this $73 billion agriculture export would devastate the rural economies. 1 in 7 Canadian jobs will be at risk. Manufacturing, energy, agriculture, transportation, and logistics, all of these sectors will be hit really hard directly. And not just that, with the consumer spending reducing due to high double-digit unemployment, the retail sector will suffer as well, because people will not have enough money to spend on restaurants and shopping. Not just that, these declining corporate profits and reduced income tax because of high unemployment will limit government spending because they'll not be making enough money from taxes. It will limit their ability to keep investing in infrastructure and social programs. A trade war would likely lead to a drop in value of the Canadian dollar. And a weaker Canadian dollar would increase the cost of imports, including machinery, electronics, and consumer goods, driving the inflation up. A trade war would lead to uncertainty in the financial markets, driving down stock prices for Canadian stocks which are relying on US exports. And then comes the coveted banks, the banks that never fail in Canada. Between 2016 and 2023, Canada's top 5 banks have collectively invested $1.1 trillion in fossil fuel companies. If we are hit with tariffs on oil and natural gas, these very safe banks will also suffer. I know you and I are worried about real estate and our home prices, but if these tariffs are implemented, we have much bigger problems than how our homes are appreciating. To an extent that the entire economy can collapse and we probably have to leave Canada. But here's the thing, Trump is a bully and we already know it. This is the same Donald Trump that signed the USMCA agreement back in 2018, allowing for fair trade between US, Canada, and Mexico. But here's the thing, the agreement is up for review in 2026, and there's a high chance that Trump is posturing in order to negotiate his terms in that agreement.
Of course, if the president does choose to proceed with tariffs on Canada, Canada will respond, and everything is on the table.
Of course, Canada has more to lose from these tariffs than US, just because of the sheer size of US compared to Canada. But what is this full force that Trudeau is talking about? Let's talk about the natural resources in Canada. First, crude oil. Canada has the third largest oil reserves. 60% of all US crude oil imports happen from Canada. That's 4.4 million barrels per day. Next in line is Mexico, which is 1/10 of Canada. Trade war on oil will increase prices of everything in the US. Because when oil prices go up, transportation goes up, and that drives inflation. Moreover, US sells 3.6 million barrels per day of crude oil to other countries after processing it. That arbitrage that they play on Canadian oil will go away. Now, I understand that this week Trump announced that they'll be drilling like hell. But until that happens, they'll have to look at two other big exporters of oil, Saudi and Russia. And I'm sure Trump knows that Canada is a much more reliable player compared to these two countries. Now let's talk about natural gas and electricity. Canada supplies approximately 85% of all US electricity imports. In fact, New York, the state of New York, about 15% of all electricity consumption happens from Canada. These imports from Canada make almost 15% of all their energy consumption. 17% of all electricity in New England comes from Canada. Same with Minnesota, which is 20% of their entire electricity consumption is dependent on Canada. Let's talk about the big ones, minerals. That's $146 billion in trade every single year. And Canada has maintained a positive trade balance of $31 billion for many years now. Canada is the second largest producer of uranium, and 27% of all uranium imports in the US come from Canada. And we already know how important uranium is because 20% of US electricity is nuclear powered. Now, of course, Canada is not the only country which is rich in uranium. They can go to Kazakhstan, Australia, Russia. But the cost of transportation would raise prices for nuclear fuel, and obviously Canada would be a much safer and a more reliable player when it comes to uranium. Now this gets worse for US because right now US is actually producing none of its own uranium. Less than 1% is domestically produced. So they are and will continue to remain reliant on other countries for uranium. Same we talk about aluminium. Canada is the fourth largest producer of aluminium, and aluminium is a critical sector for automobile industry, aerospace, construction, packaging, cans, the bottles that you see, the Coke cans that you see, defense. Aluminium is such an important resource, and Canada makes more than half of all US aluminium imports, and US produces less than 1% of aluminium. So if it's not for Canada, they will have to look at China, India, or Russia, who are the other big producers of aluminium. But again, Canada will not only be cost efficient in terms of transportation, but also a better and a more safer, reliable player in this industry. Coming to agriculture, Canada is the largest producer of potash in the world. In fact, 33% of global production happens in Canada. And potash is a key ingredient, a key nutrient used for fertilizers to improve crop yields. US imports 80% of potash from Canada, and other potential sources will again be Russia, Germany, and China. Again, Canada stands out in terms of trade relations, and I'm pretty sure with the sanctions on Russia and their strained long-standing trade relation with China, Canada again comes out as the most reliable player when it comes to potash. Canada is super rich in resources. The fifth largest producer of nickel, which is used in stainless steel, electric batteries. I know, how important that is for Trump. Given his ties with Elon Musk. Canada is the fifth largest producer of gold, jewelry, electronics, investments. Canada is the 10th largest producer of copper, which is used in wiring and plumbing. Canada is the 8th largest producer of zinc, which is used in batteries and alloy production. And Canada is the 4th largest producer in platinum. Again, this has industrial application. Talking about lumber, yes, Canada has a lot to lose if there are tariffs on lumber. However, there is enough reliance of US on Canada for lumber. Canada is the world's largest exporter of lumber and makes up to 80% of US softwood lumber imports. And lumber accounts for 30% of total cost of construction. So if there are tariffs that are put on lumber, lumber becomes 25% more expensive. A minimum and cost of construction will increase from anywhere between 10 to 20%, and there are 1.5 million homes that they need to build in 2025. Not to forget, the lumber shortage would cause construction delays that would also add on to the costs. Now, of course, there are alternatives and they produce a lot of lumber, like domestically as well. But Russia, Scandinavia, South America, again, countries that you would want to get lumber from, transportation costs will be very expensive. And again, there's a long-standing trade relation between Canada and US. And I don't understand how and why they would want to jeopardize that. Now, despite Canada being 1/10 of US, Canada is the only country that has a trade surplus on manufacturing with the US. That basically means that Canada buys more manufacturing goods from the US than it sells to the US. In fact, Canada buys more manufacturing goods than China, Japan, and Germany taken together.
We're thinking in terms of 25% on Mexico and Canada because they're allowing vast numbers of people. Canada's a very bad abuser also. Vast numbers of people to come in and fentanyl to come in.
Now, what does tariffs have to do with immigration and fentanyl? Which is exactly why I think this is about something else. And Trump is just posturing about the tariffs. Don't get me wrong, if a blanket tariff is put on Canada, we are screwed. But like Trudeau said that we will match them dollar to dollar on tariffs, Canada can actually hurt US really bad. Trump wants to make USA great again. He needs more energy to power homes, more aluminium to accelerate manufacturing, and more lumber to build homes. And for sure, Trump can escalate manufacturing of all those resources in USA, but that will cost him billions of dollars and a lot of time. He's 78 and he has one good term in him. He's a bully, but he's also desperate to make a legacy for himself in these 4 years. And I'm sure that he would not want to waste his resources in reinventing the wheel. Sure, he can also look at other countries to import these resources, but that would mean partnering with Russia, China, Venezuela, and Saudi Arabia. Canada is a much more reliable partner. Besides, Canada has a cost-efficient advantage of being just north of US and connected by landmass, which makes trade logistics a lot more cost-efficient. If Canada escapes tariffs, I hope this is a wake-up call for the new administration, whoever that is, and they are able to stand up to the world for the wealth of resources, the natural resources that Canada has, so that someone like Trump is not able to bully them again. I think Donald Trump is posturing and his real ask will come very, very soon. What do you think Trump is actually after? Does he really want to ruin his trade relations with Canada? Does he really want Canada to be the 51st state of the US? I would love to know your views in the comments. I hope you like this video. मिलते हैं अगली वीडियो में, तब तक के लिए bye bye.